Today's objective is the greatest common factor and least common multiple. Sometimes in other books they call it greatest common divisor, but most people call it greatest common factor, so that's what we're going to call it. The greatest common factor is the biggest number that will divide evenly into two or more numbers that you have. Okay, so greatest is biggest, common, it goes into both of them, and factors are the pieces of a multiplication problem. So if you're trying to see if something goes into it that you once multiplied, that's why I said dividing. All right, so factors, the pieces of a multiplication problem. We always talk about product because that's the answer to a multiplication problem. But in this, 8 times 7 equals 56. 8 times 7 is the factors. All right, least common multiple is the smallest number that two or more numbers will evenly divide into. So now you're trying to find the smallest number that two other numbers can both go into. So multiples are your number multiplied by 1, by 2, by 3. Example, the multiplication table. Okay, for example, the multiples of 4 are 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28, etc. Okay, so now that we have our definitions, let's do a couple of problems. There are many ways to find the greatest common factor and least common multiple. One way is through lists, although it's not the fastest. And then I'll show you another way. So let's find the greatest common factor of 12 and 30. So I find it most efficient to list the factors in a T-chart. So here's 12. I make a little T-chart and I start with 1. 1 times 12, 2. 2 times 6, 3. 3 times 4. And now the next number is 4, and 4 is already written down on the other side of the T-chart, so I know that I am finished with all of the factors of 30. Okay, I mean of 12. Sorry, I was looking at the 30, of the 12. So 30, I start again. 1, I always start with 1. 1 times 30, 2, the next number goes in, 2 times 15. 3, 3 times 10. Does 4 go into 30 evenly? No, so I skip it. 5. 5 times 6, and once again I'm at 6 and I've already written it down, so I know that I'm done. Now I find the biggest factor they both have. So they both have 1, they both have 2, they both have 3. This one has 4, but this one doesn't. 6 is my biggest factor they both have, because this is 12 and this is 10, 15, and 30. So the greatest common factor they both have is 6. I found that by making the list. So now if I say find the least common multiple of 12 and 30, I list the first 4 or 5 multiples. So for 12, 24, 36, 48, 60. And you can see how if this was a number that we don't normally have on the multiplication table, how this could be quite annoying. 30, it's kind of easy for this one, 30, 60, 90, 120. So I find the first multiple they both have in common. Well, 60. All right, it's the second one of 30 and it's the fifth one of 12. So the first one they have in common is 60, so that's the least common multiple. A faster method you can use is called the ladder method. And it's also called a lot of other names, but we call it the ladder method. So now let's do some of those. All right, find the greatest common factor and least common multiple of 12 and 30. Here are the steps. So why don't you, I'll move out of the way so you can write them down, okay? And then I'll go over all of them. All right, I hope we're back. Number 1, write the numbers side by side. Number 2, make a ladder rung, like a upside down division symbol underneath them. Number 3, think of the biggest number that divides both of your numbers. Number 4, end when only one will divide both of them. Number 5, multiply the side numbers for the greatest common factor. Number 6, multiply the side and bottom numbers for the least common multiple. Now that may be a little bit confusing, but I think if you watch when we do them and you do them, that you'll see it's not. All right, so I write down my 12 and 30 side by side. I make my L. What's the biggest number that goes into 12 and 30 that I can think of is 6. 6 goes into 12 twice. 6 goes into 35 times. We'll talk about this pink arrow in a few minutes. Is there anything besides 1 that goes into 2 and 5? No. So end when only 1 will divide both. So I'm done. So the numbers on the side, there's only one number. And I like to remember it by making a big G. So that's my greatest common factor, 6. And then if you want to, you could make a big L, but it really makes it kind of messy. But I'll draw this one. Big L. Ooh, see why it makes it messy? So multiply the numbers on the side and the bottom. 6 times 2 times 5. So I did 2 times 5 is 10. I'm changing the order that I'm multiplying, or I'm grouping them together. And then 10 times 6 is 60. So that was pretty quick to find the greatest common factor and the least common multiple. Now let's find the greatest common factor and least common multiple of 18 and 33. A little bit harder. So I write the numbers down, make my L. What goes into 18 and 33? 3. How many times does it go into 18? 6. How many times does it go into 33? 11. So once again, I'm finished because the only thing that goes into 6 and 11 is 1. I'll talk about the pink arrow as soon as I'm done with this one. So the greatest common factor is 3. The least common multiple is 3 times 6 times 11. I did 3 times 6 is 18. 18 times 11 is 198. And I can show you a really cool little trick for multiplying by 11s. Later. So now let's talk about relatively prime. Relatively prime is when two numbers who only have a common factor of 1. So I would say that 2 and 5 are relatively prime because the only common factor they have is 1. They also both happen to be prime numbers, okay? But they don't have to be prime numbers because 6 and 11 are also relatively prime because the only common factor they have is 1, but 6 is not a prime number. So relatively prime, you say two numbers are relatively prime when the only common factor they have is 1, okay? For example, 25 and 16. Neither of these are prime numbers, but they are relatively prime because the only common factor between these two numbers is 1. Okay, let's do one more problem. Oh, I want to just say the numbers don't need to be prime numbers. They just don't have any common factors besides 1. Let's do one more. Greatest common factor and least common multiple of 28 and 42. So I write them down. I say 7 goes into 28 4 times. Let's cover up the 2. 7 goes into 42 6 times. But now when I look at my numbers, I see that, oh, 2 can go into both of those. I guess I could have picked a bigger number, but it's fine if you don't think of the biggest one the first time out. 2 goes into 4 twice. 2 goes into 6 3 times. Now 2 and 3 are relatively prime, so I know I'm done. My greatest common factor, finally I get to multiply something. 7 times 2 is 14. My least common multiple, I'm going to do 7 times 2 times 2 times 3, and I'm going to rearrange these and just say this is 12, and do 7 times 12, because it's easier for me, is 84. And that's it for greatest common factor and least common multiple. We will have one more that includes variables, but that's a different video. That's it.